All right, deep divers, ready to geek out with me today?
Always.
We're diving deep into plant reproduction.
Oh,
It's
nice.
one of those things we all kind of take for granted, right? I mean,
Yeah.
plants are just there.
Yeah.
But the HLW of it all is seriously mind-blowing.
Absolutely. It's a whole hidden universe of complexity and ingenuity, like right under our noses.
Exactly. And I'm ready to have my mind blown wide open.
Right.
So let's start with the obvious, I guess, flowers.
Yes.
We love them for the beauty, the scents,
Yeah.
But evolutionarily, what's their purpose? What's the purpose of a flower?
Well, you can think of flowers as the plant world's ultimate matchmaking system.
Okay.
Their whole design is geared towards sexual reproduction.
Okay.
It's where the plant's version of sperm and egg, meet up to create the next generation.
Okay. So not just about looking pretty for bouquets then.
Not just that, no.
But before we get into the how of plant sex,
Right.
Can we do a quick anatomy recap? Like, remind me where all the key players are on a flower?
Sure. So picture a classic flower. You've got the petals, those eye-catching show-offs.
Yeah.
And behind them, the sepals, which are kind of like the flower's bodyguards, when it's still a bud. But the real action is happening in the androecium and the gynoecium.
Androecium, gynoecium, like a sci-fi power coupled or something.
Kinda. The androecium is the male part, made up of stamens.
Stamens, okay.
Each stamen has a stalk, the filament, and on top is the anther, where the pollen gets made.
Gotcha.
The gynoecium is the female side, with one or more pistils.
Right, and the pistil is that, like, central part.
Yeah.
Usually with a sticky top. Yeah.
You got it. That sticky part is the stigma. That's the pollen's landing pad. Below that is the style, which is a tube leading down to the ovary,
Okay.
which holds the ovules, the plant's equivalent of eggs.
All right, so we've got our cast of characters. Let's zoom in on the male side first.
Yeah.
What's going on inside those anthers where the pollen's being made?
This is where we get microscopic. Mm-hmm. Inside the anther, you've got these compartments called microsporangia, which are basically pollen factories.
Pollen factories, I love it.
Yeah.
What's the production line look like in there?
So within each microsporangium, there's special tissue where cells undergo meiosis.
Right.
That's a type of cell division that produces microspores. Think of them as pollen blueprints.
So each microspore is a tiny pollen grain in the making.
Exactly. Each one develops a super tough outer shell called the extiphyne, made of spore pollen.
Sporopollen.
Yeah.
Yatchy.
This stuff is incredible, one of the most resistant organic materials out there.
Wow.
It's why pollen can survive harsh conditions and even fossilize, giving us clues about ancient plant life.
Wait, so the pollen I'm sneezing from, right now, could be related to plants from millions of years ago. That's both, like, cool and making me itch.
It's pretty mind-blowing. And speaking of sneezing, that's actually down to the proteins on the pollen surface. They trigger an immune response in some people.
Right, the joys of pollen allergies.
Right.
But hey, small price to pay for the amazing world of plants, I guess.
Yeah.
So we've covered the guys.
Yeah.
What about the female side? What's happening over in the ovule zone?
Okay, so let's shift our focus to the pistil.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, that ovary holding the ovules.
Yeah.
Each ovule is like a tiny fortified chamber with protective layers called integuments
Correct.
around the nucellus, the central tissue.
Like a mini fortress guarding the potential for new plant life.
Great analogy. Within the nucellus, a key process called megasporogenesis takes place.
Megasporogenesis.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the female equivalent of what we saw with the microspores.
Right.
A special cell in there, the megaspore mother cell, undergoes meiosis to produce megaspores.
So meiosis is happening on both the male and female sides.
Yes.
But, like, with different starting cells.
Precisely. And just like with the microspores, only one megaspore typically survives. This one will develop into the embryo sac. The female gametophyte, which is a fancy way of saying where the egg cell hangs out.
Okay, so we've got these intricate setups on both the male and female sides.
Yes.
But they're totally isolated from each other.
Right.
How do they actually, connect?
That, my friend, is the magic of pollination.
Pollination, okay.
It's the essential bridge between the sperm-carrying pollen and the egg-containing ovule. And plants have come up with a wild variety of strategies to make this happen.
Oh, yeah. Pollination is where things get really interesting. I've always been fascinated by the whole, like, wind-blown pollen versus, like, animal-assisted pollination thing. It just seems like two totally different approaches.
They are. So wind pollination is kind of like a grand, messy lottery. Plants like like grasses.
Yeah.
They release clouds of pollen into the air, hoping some tiny fraction will land on a receptive stigma.
Okay.
It's a numbers game. They have to produce a ton of pollen to compensate for the randomness.
That's this thing, spray and pray.
Exactly. And their flower structure reflects this. Exposed stamens dangling out to catch the wind, and large feathery stigmas to increase their chances of catching a pollen grain.
Right. Makes sense. But what about those plants that rely on animals? Those are the ones with, like, the showy, fragrant flowers.
Right. This is where coevolution really shines. Plants and animals have developed these mutually beneficial relationships over millions of years.
Yeah.
The plants get targeted pollen delivery, and the animals get rewards like nectar or even safe havens for their eggs.
It's like a beautiful, mutually beneficial, like, barter system.
Exactly, and that's why we see such mind-boggling diversity of pollinators. Insects, birds, bats, even some lizards and rodents get in on the action.
Wow. It's like a whole ecosystem built around getting busy. Okay, so we've got pollen flying through the air, being carried by all sorts of creatures. But does a stigma, does it just accept any pollen that lands on it?
That's a great question.
I imagine plants are a bit picky about, who they reproduce with.
You're absolutely right. Most plants have evolved mechanisms to avoid self-pollination.
Self-pollination. So that's when a flower pollinates itself, or another flower on the same plant.
Exact.
But isn't that more efficient? Like, why go to all the trouble of attracting, outside help?
Because genetic diversity is key for survival.
Okay.
Self-pollination is like inbreeding.
Yeah.
It can lead to weaker offspring who are more susceptible to diseases or environmental changes.
Right. So it's like if all you're doing is shuffling the same genes over and over, eventually you get a less robust deck of cards.
Exactly. Plants want to mix things up, bring in new genetic combinations to keep their offspring strong and adaptable.
Okay, so how do they prevent this self-pollination then?
One way is through timing. The pollen might be released before the stigma is receptive, or vice versa.
Oh, sneaky.
Other plants have spatial separation, with anthers and stigma positioned to make self-pollination difficult, and then there's self-incompatibility.
Self-incompatibility, okay.
Yeah. It's a genetic system where the pistil can actually recognize pollen from the same plant and reject it. Think of it like a lock and key. Only pollen from a different plant of the same species has a right key to unlock fertilization.
That's amazing. So even if a self-pollen grain manages to land on the stigma, it's basically like out of luck.
Exactly. And some plants take it a step further, having separate male and female flowers. To ensure cross-pollination is the only option.
Wow. Plants are way more strategic about their love lives than I ever imagined. So let's say a compatible pollen grain does land on a receptive stigma. What happens next? Does it just like automatically start fertilizing?
Not so fast. There's a whole intricate interaction that happens between the pollen and the pistil.
Oh.
It's not just a landing and go situation. It's more like a botanical interview process.
A pollen interview. Okay, so what are the steps?
First, the pistil has to recognize the pollen, making sure it's from a compatible plant. This involves complex chemical signaling back and forth.
So the pistil is basically checking the pollen's ID, making sure it's not from the wrong side of the plant tracks, so to speak.
Precisely. If the pollen gets the green light, the pistil allows it to germinate and grow a pollen tube.
Okay.
This tube grows down through the style towards the ovary, carrying the male gametes towards the ovule.
So it's like a tiny botanical tunnel being dug. What happens when this pollen tube reaches the ovary?
Well, it needs to find its way to the ovule, and that's where those synergids we talked about earlier come in.
Right.
They act as guides, helping the pollen tube locate and enter the ovule through a tiny opening called the micropyle.
So the synergids are like the ovule's welcoming committee, making sure the pollen tube finds, like, the right door.
Exactly. And once inside, the pollen tube releases its precious cargo, 2 male gametes.
Okay, the stage is set. We've got the male gametes inside the ovule, ready to meet the egg.
Right.
This has got to be the climax of the plant love story.
Right.
What happens next?
You're in for a treat. Angiosperms, flowering plants, have this unique process called double fertilization. Okay.
Which is unlike anything else in the plant kingdom.
Double fertilization. What does that mean exactly?
It means that 2 fertilization events are happening at the same time inside the embryo sac.
Wow.
One male gamete fuses with the egg cell, forming the zygote, which will become the embryo.
Right. That's the fertilization we're familiar with.
Right.
So what's the other event?
This is where things get really cool. The second male gamete doesn't fuse with the egg.
Okay.
Instead, it fuses with those two polar nuclei we talked about earlier.
Right.
The ones hanging out in the central cell of the embryo sac.
Hold on, there's like a three-way fusion going on here.
Yep, it creates a triploid cell, meaning it has 3 sets of chromosomes. This cell will develop into the endosperm.
Endosperm. Refresh my memory. What is that again?
Think of it like the embryo's built-in lush box.
Okay.
It's a nutrient-rich tissue that will nourish the developing embryo as it grows.
So we've got one fertilization for the baby plant and another for its food supply. Plants are so efficient. Exactly. Double fertilization ensures resources are only invested in developing seeds if fertilization has actually happened.
Smart. Okay, so we've got this, like, double fertilization action happening. Does the ovule just, like, magically transform into a seed now?
Not magically, but it's pretty remarkable. A carefully choreographed series of events unfolds, leading to both the seed and the fruit development.
Okay, I am officially hooked.
Okay.
Walk me through this transformation. What happens first?
Well, the endosperm is the early bird here. Remember that triploid cell?
Right.
It starts dividing rapidly, creating a massive tissue that fills the embryo sac. This can be liquid, like coconut water, or solid, like the meat of a coconut.
Okay, so the endosperm is setting up shop, like getting the nursery ready.
Yeah.
But what about the actual embryo?
Right.
How does that develop?
It all starts with the zygote, that single cell formed when the sperm and egg fused.
Yeah.
It goes through a series of carefully controlled cell divisions, gradually shaping itself into a multicellular structure.
It's wild to think that a giant oak tree starts from a single cell.
I know, right?
Crazy.
The early stages of embryo development are similar in monocots and dicots. Those are the two main groups of flowering plants.
Okay.
The zygote divides, forming a proembryo, which then becomes a little globular-shaped cluster of cells.
So it's like a tiny microscopic ball of potential at this point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As it develops further, it takes on a heart shape, and you start to see the beginnings of the cotyledons, the seed leaves.
Right. Those are the first leaves that pop up when a seed sprouts, right?
Yep. They're crucial, acting as food storage in some plants or as the main photosynthetic organs in others.
So how do the embryos differ between, like, monocots and dicots?
Well, dicots, like beans and sunflowers, have 2 cotyledons. Monocots, like corn and rice, have just 1.
Okay, so that's one difference. Anything else?
The structure of the embryo axis, the part that will become the stem and root, also varies. Dicots have an epicotyl, which forms the shoot, and a hypocotyl, which becomes the root. Monocots have a more compact axis with a single cotyledon called the scutellum attached to it.
So same basic blueprint, but like some key variations depending on the plant family.
Exactly. Now, while all this is going on with the embryo, something else incredible is happening. That ovule is transforming into a seed.
The seed, that little capsule of potential holding the blueprint for a whole new plant.
Yeah.
How does that transformation happen?
Well, the integuments, those protective layers of the ovule, they harden up and become the seed coat. It's like Mother Nature's armor, shielding the embryo inside.
Right, makes sense. Got to keep that precious cargo safe.
And the micropyle, that tiny opening in the ovule, remains as a small pore in the seed coat. It's crucial for letting water and oxygen in when the seed starts to germinate.
Okay, so the seed coat is all about protection.
Yes.
Well, what about the food supply? Is the endosperm always there in the mature seed?
Good question. There are 2 types of seeds, albuminous and non-albuminous.
Okay.
In albuminous seeds, the endosperm is still present in the mature seed, providing a ready-to-eat meal for the embryo when it germinates. But in non-albuminous seeds, the embryo absorbs the endosperm during development, storing those nutrients in its cotyledons.
So in those cases, the cotyledons themselves become the food packs. Fascinating. Okay, so we've got the seed like all packaged up and ready to go.
Yep.
What about the fruit? How does that come into the picture?
As the seed develops, the ovary, that chamber where the ovules were hanging out,
Yeah.
undergoes its own transformation, developing into the fruit.
Wait, so the fruit is basically a ripened ovary.
It is.
Mind blown.
And just like with seeds, fruits come in a wild variety of shapes and sizes, from juicy fruits like berries to dry fruits like nuts, and they've all evolved different ways to help disperse those seeds, giving them the best shot at finding a good spot to grow.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from pollen formation to pollination to seeds and even fruits. But are there any other, like, twists and turns in the plant reproduction story? Anything particularly unusual we should know about?
There are a couple of fascinating phenomena that are worth exploring further.
Okay.
One is apomixis.
Apomixis, okay.
It's a form of asexual reproduction that's kind of like a plant version of cloning.
Okay.
It allows plants to produce seeds without fertilization.
Hold on. Seeds without fertilization. How is that even possible? That seems like breaking like the fundamental rules of biology.
It is pretty wild, right? But some plants, especially certain grasses,
Okay.
have evolved this ability.
Right.
There are different ways it can happen, but essentially the embryo develops directly from a cell in the ovule without any sperm involved.
So it's like the plant is making like a copy of itself, like bypassing the whole sexual reproduction process.
Exactly. And this has some interesting implications for agriculture. Imagine being able to propagate hybrid plants, which are often high-yielding but difficult to breed, without the genetic shuffling of sexual reproduction.
So farmers could maintain those like desirable hybrid traits without having to create new hybrids every year.
Yeah,
That's pretty revolutionary.
it has the potential to be. Although harnessing apomixis for widespread use is still a challenge scientists are working on.
That's amazing how much diversity there is in the plant world, from wind-blown pollen to insect dances to double fertilization and now seed production without fertilization.
Right.
What other surprises are like hidden in the world of plants?
Well, there's another phenomenon called polyembryony, which is when you get multiple embryos within a single seed.
Wait, multiple embryos? I thought each seed only contained one.
That's the norm. But some plants, like citrus fruits, can have multiple embryos in one seed.
So when I eat an orange, I could be consuming like multiple potential orange trees.
In a way, yes. Polyembryony can happen in a few different ways. Sometimes multiple egg cells get fertilized, and sometimes extra embryos develop from the tissue surrounding the embryo sac.
Plants are just full of surprises.
Yeah.
It makes you realize there's like a whole universe of complexity hidden within those seemingly simple fruits and seeds.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, I think we've covered an incredible amount of ground already in this deep dive into plant reproduction. It's been a whirlwind of information, but it's clear there's so much more to explore.
Right.
Yeah. It's been an amazing journey so far.
Welcome back to our botanical adventure. Before the break, we journeyed from tiny pollen grains to the formation of seeds and fruits. It's quite a journey packed into those seemingly simple structures.
Seriously. I'm looking at the apple on my desk with a whole new level of respect. It's like a tiny time capsule of plant ingenuity.
Exactly. And to truly appreciate the sheer diversity of plant reproduction, let's shift gears and look at some specific examples.
Okay, perfect. Love getting into the details. So where should we start? Maybe with those wind-pollinated plants we talked about earlier. They always seemed like so different from those showy flowers that, attract insects and birds.
That's a great starting point. Wind-pollinated plants are the ultimate minimalists. They don't need flashy petals or intoxicating scents to attract pollinators. Their strategy is all about efficiency and maximizing their chances in a world where, the wind calls the shots.
So what kind of adaptations are we talking about here? I imagine like when you're relying on the whims of the wind, you need to be pretty strategic.
Absolutely. Take grasses, for example. They are masters of wind pollination. Their flowers are small and unassuming, lacking those colorful petals that signal pollinate me to insects. Instead, their stamens, those pollen-producing structures, are often long and flexible, almost like they're dangling out there to catch the breeze.
It's like they're waving flags in the wind hoping to snag a passing pollen grain.
That's a great visual. And their stigmas, those feathery structures that receive the pollen, are also exposed, and often quite large. Maximizing their surface area to intercept those wind-borne pollen grains. Remember, it's a numbers game, and wind pollination relies a lot on chance.
Which explains why I'm like drowning in a sea of tissues every spring, right?
Right.
All that pollen flying around, it's got to land somewhere. But from the plant's perspective, makes sense to just produce massive amounts of pollen and see what happens.
Exactly. They have to hedge their bets, so to speak.
Hmm.
Now, let's switch gears completely and look at some plants that have taken a totally different approach and rely on animal pollinators.
Okay.
This is where we see some of the most incredible examples of coevolution in action.
Oh, yeah. The relationships between plants and their pollinators are just like mind-boggling.
Mm.
It's like they've been working together, dancing this intricate evolutionary dance for, millions of years.
Absolutely. Let's take orchids, for example.
Yep.
They're famous for their beauty and their incredibly specialized pollination mechanisms. Some orchids have evolved to attract very specific pollinators.
Yeah. I've heard about, orchids that mimic the appearance and even the scent of female insects to trick males into visiting. Talk about a deceptive dating profile.
It's true. Some orchids are masters of disguise. They can look and smell so much like female bees or wasps that the males just can't resist a closer look.
Right.
And in the process of trying to mate with the female, they end up picking up pollen and unwittingly transferring it to the next orchid they visit.
That is so sneaky, but brilliant.
I know.
What other tricks do orchids have up their sleeves?
Well, many orchids have developed these elaborate structures to ensure that pollen is deposited exactly where they want it on the pollinator's body.
Okay.
Some have these hinged petals that trap the insect for a moment, forcing it to brush against the pollen-laden anthers as it escapes.
Okay.
Others have strategically placed nectaries, those glands that produce nectar, to guide the pollinator into just the right position for pollen transfer.
So it's like a carefully designed, obstacle course for their unsuspecting pollinators.
Precisely. And the rewards for the pollinators can be pretty specific, too. Some orchids tailor their nectar to the nutritional needs of their target pollinator. Others offer fragrant oils or even provide shelter within their flowers.
Wow. It really highlights, the interconnectedness of nature, right?
Yes.
These relationships have developed over millions of years with, plants and their pollinators becoming increasingly intertwined.
Absolutely. Now let's look at another fascinating example, figs.
Okay.
They have this truly unique pollination system involving tiny wasps.
Figs and wasps. That doesn't sound like the most harmonious partnership.
It might seem strange, but it's a perfect example of mutualism, where both species benefit from the relationship. Figs actually can't pollinate themselves.
Oh, wow.
They rely on these tiny wasps called fig wasps to carry pollen from one fig to another.
Okay. I'm intrigued. How does this unusual system work?
First of all, figs aren't actually fruits in the traditional sense. They're more like inverted flowers, with hundreds of tiny flowers tucked away inside a hollow structure.
So what I think of as a fig is actually a bunch of flowers hidden inside.
Exactly. And inside this fig inflorescence, there are separate male and female flowers.
Okay.
The female flowers have short styles, while the male flowers have longer ones.
And the style is that stalk that connects the stigma to the ovary.
Okay. Now here's where the wasps come in. Female fig wasps enter the fig through a tiny opening called the ostiole.
Okay.
They're already carrying pollen from another fig, and they lay their eggs in the short-styled female flowers.
So the fig, provides a nursery for the wasp larvae.
Precisely. But here's the clever part. As the wasp larvae develop, they pollinate those long-styled female flowers. When the new generation of wasps emerges, the males mate with the females, then they die inside the fig. The females, carrying pollen from the male flowers, they escape and fly off to find another fig to lay their eggs in.
Wow. It's like a perfectly timed, intricate dance.
Yes.
Between the fig and the wasp. It makes you realize how important biodiversity is, right? If you lose one species, it can disrupt these intricate relationships.
Absolutely.
And have ripple effects throughout the whole ecosystem.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears again, let's circle back to something we touched on earlier, self-incompatibility.
Okay.
I think it deserves a closer look. It's such a remarkable adaptation.
Okay. Remind me what self-incompatibility is all about.
So it's a genetic mechanism that prevents self-fertilization, ensuring that plants outbreed and maintain genetic diversity.
Okay.
So even if a pollen grain from the same plant lands on the stigma, it won't be able to fertilize the egg. It's like having a built-in rejection system.
Right.
Right. So the pistil can actually recognize pollen from its own plant and shut it down.
Okay.
It involves this complex interaction between proteins on the surface of the pollen and proteins in the pistil. If the proteins match, boom. The pistil blocks the pollen from germinating or prevents the pollen tube from growing.
It's like the plant has its own, immune system.
Yeah.
Rejecting anything that's too closely related.
A great way to put it. And this is super important for plant breeders. If you're trying to create new plant varieties, you have to understand these self-incompatibility mechanisms to ensure you can successfully cross different individuals.
So it's not just like a fascinating biological quirk.
Right.
It has real-world implications for, like, agriculture
Hmm.
and our ability to develop, new and improved crops.
Absolutely. Now let's shift our focus to the other star of the show, the fruit.
Oh, yes. Fruits. They're the delicious reward for all this, like, botanical hard work right
Yeah.
now. But from a plant's perspective, like, what's the point of producing a fruit?
Fruits are all about giving those seeds a good head start in life. They've evolved to protect the seeds and to help them travel to new locations where they have a better chance of germinating and growing into, strong plants.
It's like a dispersal mechanism, ensuring the seeds don't just fall, like, at the foot of the parent plant and crowd each other out.
Exactly. And just like with pollination, there's a huge diversity of strategies when it comes to fruit and seed dispersal.
Right, right. I'm guessing, like, wind plays a role for some plants.
You bet. Think of those fluffy dandelion seeds that float effortlessly on the breeze, or those winged maple seeds that spin like helicopters as they fall.
Nature's little parachutes.
Yes.
So clever.
Right. And then you've got fruits that rely on animals for dispersal. Some have hooks or barbs that cling to fur or feathers, hitching a ride on unsuspecting passersby. Others have fleshy, bright-colored fruits that tempt animals to eat them, and then the seeds get dispersed in their droppings.
Like a win-win for both, right?
Well,
The animal
yeah.
gets a tasty meal, and the plant gets its seeds, scattered far and wide.
Yeah.
Talk about a mutually beneficial relationship.
Absolutely. And there are even more dramatic examples out there.
Wow.
Some plants have fruits that explode, shooting their seeds out like tiny botanical missiles. Others have fruits that rely on water, bobbing along currents to travel long distances.
Whoa. Nature is full of creative solutions when it comes to getting those seeds out into the world.
It really is. This diversity of strategies is a testament to the power of evolution and the incredible adaptability of plants. It's also a reminder that even in something as seemingly simple as a fruit,
Yeah.
there's a whole world of complexity waiting to be discovered.
Welcome back, Deep Divers. It's been quite a journey exploring the intricate world of plant reproduction. From microscopic pollen grains to elaborate pollination strategies and, the ingenious ways plants disperse their seeds. It's amazing how much is happening right under our noses.
It really is. And I think one of the key takeaways from our deep dive is this interconnectedness of nature. We tend to think of plants as these passive things just growing there, but they've evolved these complex relationships with animals, fungi, and even other plants. They rely on these interactions for everything from getting pollinated to accessing nutrients to spreading their seeds.
Yeah. It's like this beautifully choreographed dance with each, species playing a crucial role in the grand ecosystem.
Exactly. And understanding these relationships is becoming even more crucial in a world, facing increasing environmental challenges. We can't just look at plants in isolation. We need to consider the whole web of life they're a part of.
Totally agree. The more we understand about how nature works, the better equipped we'll be to protect it.
Yeah.
As we wrap up our deep dive, what are some of the key insights you're taking away from this exploration?
For me, it's the sheer ingenuity and resilience of plants. They've evolved to overcome some incredible challenges. Being rooted in one place, dealing with unpredictable weather, finding ways to attract pollinators. It's a testament to the power of natural selection and the incredible creativity of evolution.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's like plants have this incredible toolkit of strategies, for ensuring their survival and passing on their genes to the next generation. It makes you wonder, like, what other secrets they're hiding.
Oh, there are undoubtedly countless mysteries still waiting to be uncovered in the plant world. We've made some amazing discoveries, but there's always more to learn. That's what makes studying nature so fascinating.
Totally. It's like this never-ending adventure with something new to discover around every corner. Well, I don't know about you, but after this deep dive into plant reproduction, I'm craving a big bowl of fruit salad.
I'm right there with you. I think we've earned it. And every time I eat a piece of fruit now, I'll have a whole new appreciation for the incredible journey it took to get to my plate.
Well said. Until next time, deep divers, keep exploring and stay curious about the amazing world of plants. And remember, there's a whole universe of wonder waiting to be discovered in your own backyard.